So Lena is here. I am here. And we
Baby's
are
here.
Oh, hi baby. Okay, so we have one question that someone asked us on one of our YouTube videos that we were going to start with, and then we'll start going through all the questions that you're asking. Just go ahead and ask your questions in the comments, or you can send us one of those little question doodly boppers. The first question someone asked us was, they said, I've been in DBT for 6 months. How do I know that I'm getting better? So I'm going to send this to you, Lena. As a therapist, you probably have more specific things you can think of.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, it's a big question and it makes sense. Like, we want to know, like, am I getting better or am I just, like, treading water? Because I think what can happen, especially in DBT, is, the way we look at, like, the stages of DBT, the first stage is just like learning how to survive, because a lot of us with BPD have felt like we've been surviving for a long time, but we've really just been kind of drowning. And so like the first stage in DBT is like learning how to tolerate distress. And what I always tell clients is like learning how to tolerate distress is helpful and it doesn't feel good. Cause like actually knowing how to like just survive your emotions like doesn't feel like you're getting better. So usually people will be like, oh, it's been 6 months and I still feel like shit. I think this isn't working. Sorry, I'm cursing on live. I'm really bad at that. But I think what we have to keep in mind is that you might be getting better, you might just not be feeling better. Now, how do we know if we're actually getting better? So that's why in like DBT, for example, or most therapists will have you have your goals for your treatment, you have your goals for your life. So are we making progress towards those, even if it's doesn't feel like it, even if we're making a little bit, then I'd say like you're getting better. Is it going to feel like it? Probably not. But you probably are maybe making more progress than you realize, because we just feel terrible.
Yeah, having the treatment plan. That's the word. Them's the words. The treatment plan. I feel like that's one of those things that is really helpful, because then when you have specific goals, it's like you check how you're doing against how you were before. If your therapist is like taking those notes, that's really helpful, because then you could say, oh, I still need to work on this, or hey, I haven't even thought about this as a problem in weeks. So, hooray!
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Oh gosh. Someone says, what is your advice on losing an FP? My fiance died and I am lost with it all. Oh. Ooh. Well, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. That's some heavy stuff.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Lena?
So, I mean, losing a favorite person, I haven't been through it in a long time. And I've never lost a favorite person to death. So I'm so sorry that happened to you. That is probably one of the most traumatic things you can go through in life. So I'm so sorry. I think what can be so hard is, yeah, we do feel really lost without a favorite person. And so kind of similarly to what I was just saying, I think what's hard is that like those of us with BPD especially, but like humans in general, we tend to gauge how we're doing on how we feel. And when we are feeling a lot, we're going through a traumatic loss, something like that, it's really hard to see kind of like above, like to keep our head above water, really to see beyond like our suffering in the moment. So I think getting the support that you need to like be able to just survive this right now. The thing that's hard about grief is it's something that takes a long time to process, but if we can get through that first immediate just hell of it, really, I don't have a better word, then you'll be able to actually process the grief. But right now you just have to learn how to survive it.
Yeah. I haven't lost anyone to death in a while. Well, there are a lot of people on my list. I will say, I think, I one of the things I've been afraid of is losing, you know, like my parents or some of the other significant relationships in my life. And I had a conversation with my therapist a couple of months ago about it, and was something to the effect of like, I am afraid that I'm going to be just a big mess and that it's going to be hard for me to do things for a much longer period of time than is like normal. And she said, this surprised me. She's like, well, you know, I mean, I feel like if it was pretty difficult for you to do anything like for a year after one of your parents died, that would make sense. And that shocked me because that seemed like a really long time. You know, I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, when one of my parents dies, I should be able to just like get back on the horse like in 2 weeks. And for her to be like, no, like a year would be pretty standard. I was like, oh, okay. Maybe I'm not doing as badly as I thought. Like, we tend to judge ourselves pretty harshly on what we think we should be able to do. And so I just wanted to share that with you, that, you know, grief takes a while to process. And so
Yeah,
if it takes a while,
and especially
okay.
yeah, especially for those of us who feel things so intensely. Like last week, I think last Friday, my cat, not this one, this old lady doesn't do anything, but the other one caught a bird, and I thought the bird wasn't going to make it. And my neighbors are probably very concerned because I was like on my balcony, like sobbing over a bird. So a favorite person, yeah, that's going to be really hard. So don't be extra hard on yourself if you're really struggling.
Yeah, we got a couple of, speaking of really struggling, we have a couple of messages that got sent in from people who are really struggling. One person said, I've been suffering from BPD for almost 7 years now, and I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel anymore. It's a constant cycle of guilt and shame. And then someone else said, going through a really depressive period. I don't want to speak to anyone and don't see a way out. I know the things I need to do to get better, but how do I get myself to do it?
Do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm trying to think of, I definitely can relate to feeling like things are not going to get better. Because for those of you who don't know or haven't seen like my intro video on our YouTube, I started therapy when I was 13, and I didn't really enter any kind of meaningful recovery until I was in my early 30s. So I spent, 20-ish years in varying degrees of emotional and mental disarray. So I can definitely relate to, having a difficult time for a long time. And I can't like sit here and be like, yes, it's going to get better. Like, hold on. But I do genuinely tend to think that it is possible. And there are a lot of things you can do to answer like the specific question of getting yourself to do the things. I find it's hard because it depends on what's getting in the way. Like sometimes to me, it's like an emotional barrier or it's like a skill barrier. I'm trying to think of some of the specific things that I was taught, because like what I generally do in that situation when there's something that I have to do and I really don't feel like doing it, or I've been depressed for a long time, I try to hack myself as much as possible. So like I put myself in situations where it's hard for me not to act. For example, like inviting somebody over to do something with me, even though I really feel like isolating and I really don't want to see anybody. Once I know somebody's coming over, that can be pretty motivating to me to like at least take a shower and try to look somewhat like a human. Like I know I respond to social pressure, so I use that as a way to get myself to do stuff. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, to the point of like, I've been struggling with this for a long time. I think, yeah, similarly to Zanny, I didn't get officially diagnosed until I was 20, but I definitely was struggling with BPD before that, and I'm 34 now. So, I've probably struggled with BPD more of my life than I haven't. And I think it's really hard not to feel at times, like, especially if you're really in that like early stage of like you can't really get your head above water, it's really hard not to lose hope. And it's really easy to, see people who are doing better and be like, there's no way I'm ever gonna get to that point. Or, vice versa. To also kind of like, what do these people even know? They don't really know what it's like to struggle because like I met all the symptoms for BPD. I don't meet any of them anymore. So sometimes I feel like people might see me and feel like I don't know what they're talking about. I think what's hard is like when we're struggling, we feel like more of a burden than other people. We tend to struggle. I hear that guilt and shame that's coming up. And so I could talk a lot about this. Since we're in a live video, just one thing I will say is one thing that I found really helpful when I was like in early recovery is finding the friends that I could talk to about anything, and then the friends that could just be there when I needed like a human being around. And differentiating those two, because I found that as someone with BPD, I see other people, like for the longest time at least, I've kind of worked on this, but I would see other people in my life as they need to kind of be 100% all the friend energy that I need. And so like when people didn't know how to show up, then I would interpret that as like guilt and shame for me, like, oh, I'm too much, or then I would like split and be like, oh, they're a terrible friend. I can't have them in my life. And so learning how to have people in my life that literally were just okay, like that's a friend that I can take a walk with or, crochet with or whatever. And maybe they can't offer me emotional support, but like I won't be alone for like an hour and a half was a huge help for me. And now I've learned to have like different variations of friendships. I found that that's helped a lot in my recovery. But if you feel like you're not getting the support you need, I know it's really hard not to just want to give up, but like there's communities out there, like you found us, there's like other people, there's maybe other resources like a different therapist or support groups or whatever. Like don't lose hope. It's really hard, but it's possible.
Yeah, and in terms of support groups, there are several. I can think of like Emotions Matter as one that offers free peer support groups, which can be a helpful place to go. So, yeah, definitely check that out. All right. Thinking about the impact of a formal diagnosis and the journey of acceptance, how do you find the balance of leaning into it to get through it and embracing it, and as compared to not becoming it and using it? I mean, it says excusing. I'm assuming that means not using it as an excuse. So finding the balance between accepting your diagnosis and not to the point that you become it and it's like your excuse.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the thing about using a diagnosis as an excuse, like I don't think that you'll get too far with that. So I don't think you would even like allow yourself to do that, because it's not going to feel very rewarding. Because the thing about people with BPD is we struggle with often like just really intense shame. So if I feel shame about the fact that I have BPD and the fact that I do things as a result of my BPD, I'm probably not going to be, I think like there's such a stereotype that people with BPD are abusive or whatever, but I think often the opposite is true, that we feel so much shame about the diagnosis that like we don't really cut ourselves slack at all. So I think that like what I'm trying to say is I think that like understanding where your behavior comes from, it's okay if like you make mistakes, do things like as a result of your BPD. Like I don't think that you acknowledging that your BPD causes certain behaviors means that you're kind of like making excuses for yourself, and like I think understanding like how to balance that with like, is this really serving me to continue to act like this? taking the judgment out of it, I think, is the thing I'm trying to say. So like whenever I have clients in session who are like, oh, I'm such a horrible person, I'm a monster to people in my life, I'm like, well, let's figure out what that actually means, you know, because that's the flip side of like making excuses for ourselves, is that often what happens in my experience is that more so that people are extra harsh on themselves.
Yeah. For me, I look at this and I feel like there's sort of two different parts to this. Part of it is identity, and then part of it is sort of like the excusing part. And so for the identity part, I can't say that this happens for everyone, but I have definitely noticed for a lot of people, myself included, there is kind of like this pattern that occurs where like you discover you have BPD and you start to be able to identify where in your life certain symptoms come up, and then it kind of feels like I am BPD and like this is my identity, and I like stake myself in this diagnosis. And then at least for me, as I start to go through therapy, I realize that it's not I am BPD or I'm not. It's like there are certain things about me that fall into these sort of diagnostic criteria categories, and there are things that don't. And I don't like, I'm not a disorder. That doesn't even really make any sense. Like there's this, it's odd now looking back to think of there was a time when I really like over identified with the diagnosis, and it's like, no, I mean, what even really is BPD? If you get really existential about it, it's like, it's kind of a pattern of behaviors that tend to occur together that we have, that psychologists have been able to observe and describe, right? It's like, so that's not really a whole personality on its own. It's just some traits. And so I think recognizing that that's really all that it is, and I'm not the disorder. There are a lot of other things that make me a unique person outside of that. That helps to not over-identify with it. I think also realizing that my emotional sensitivity is not the disordered part. Like I frequently say being emotionally sensitive is not a disorder. And I don't mean that being emotionally sensitive can't be challenging sometimes, but like the disordered part is the inability to like regulate that emotion. Like having strong feelings is not on its own disordered or problematic. I think that's the other thing that helps me. And then in terms of excusing it, it's like, I mean, sure, like in an argument, there have been times where like I'm really dysregulated and I might have said something like, well, I have BPD, so therefore, like the implication being you should cut me more slack or something. But as Lena said, it's like then afterwards, like it doesn't get you anywhere. It feels like crap, and you're not actually, you can't use something even in an argument as an excuse and have it like actually go anywhere. It doesn't make you feel competent. And so I think it's the more you work on your skills and whatever therapy path you're choosing, it eventually gets easier to use your skills and not devolve into arguments like that. Does it get easier with age? Like, does BPD get easier with age? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that actually there's research that shows that part of why people with BPD tend to have such high remission rates is also that we kind of age out of the disorder. Now, that being said, like you can still be older and struggle with BPD if you've never really gotten like treatment or support for it. But it definitely, I mean, I think about where I was 15 years ago. Yeah, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah,
It gets easier.
Me 15 years ago, I think a lot of the things that I know and do now, I would have at the time, even if it had been offered to me, I'd have been like, this is crazy. This is not going to work. My emotions are way too intense for this. Like there was a period where I really feel like my emotions were so intense and I was so unable to deal with them that really all I could try to do was survive until the intensity decreased. And I really noticed like in my mid-20s, like of course there's still like situations that activate emotions, but just sort of like the baseline intensity when I was like 25, 26 really did start to get a little bit easier. And then like when I hit in my 30s, it was like, oh, with skills on top of that, I feel like I can really manage this much better now. Let's see. This is a good one. I know it. I recognize. This is okay. I'm scared that if I do recover, what will I be? The BPD self is all I've ever known. So the idea of recovery sounds scary because I don't know who I am or what I will be.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a great thing to talk about. I don't know if I felt this as much with BPD as I have with, I used to have an eating disorder. And this is one of the things that I remembered. I was like, I used to have this thought where it was like, I can't imagine being happy with gaining weight. Like I would want to unalive myself if I was actually happy with that, which doesn't make sense actually now looking back at it, because it was like, oh, but if I'm actually happy, like I'd actually be happy with it. If the disordered part is gone, I legitimately won't care. Like it won't, I wouldn't have the feeling that I have now, right? And so I think that's such a wild thing to remember having thought. So that was the first thing I thought when I read your question or your comment, because I was just, that's what that made me think of. And it's really wild. I've had this conversation with a bunch of people too, where it's with BPD, it's like, you know, what if my emotions, you know, aren't as, you know, like what if my emotions go away? I actually did not find that happened at all, but
Yeah.
Anyway, wait.
Yeah, I definitely had that fear too. I think part of that comes from like my life was so ruled by my emotions, and my emotions were so intense. I felt like, okay, if I don't have these like really intense emotions or any of this stuff, like I I can't even like fathom. It's sort of like I remember hearing once that like hummingbirds see colors outside of the color spectrum that humans see. And when you try to imagine what that is, like you can't, because like we don't like it's I can't imagine another color because I only see the color spectrum that I see. So it's sort of like, yeah, it's trying to imagine a color that isn't in your color spectrum because this is what you're used to, right? So like it's really scary to think like, what is this going to be like? I remember I felt really scared it was going to be really boring. I was like, I'm just going to be like an office drone with like a 9 to 5, and I'm just going to like not feel emotions, and I'm going to be boring. And like it couldn't be farther from the truth. I feel like my life is so much more enjoyable now that I'm in recovery. But I think the thing is like keeping in mind that it's not going to be anything you can imagine when you're in early recovery, because it's like, yeah, you're trying to imagine something you haven't experienced before. So it is really scary, and I guarantee it's going to be worth it.
Okay, so there is another question. What if you have tried and can't seem to get a life worth living? Do you just accept it?
Mhm.
I think
I would want to know, like, you know,
yeah.
what is having a life worth living mean to you, and what is keeping you from having it? Like, because having a life worth living is such a it's pretty vague, right? It means something different to everyone, right? So I can't say like, oh, you should accept not having a life worth living, because I think it's possible for everyone to have a life worth living. A life that you're happy about might not be something that happens all the time, or you know, like happiness is a very fleeting experience, but a life that you experience as like worth living you know, I'd want to know what that would even mean for you, you know, before I could say like, oh, you should just accept not having it.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess the thing that occurs to me is like my life is not as like recovery is not really a static, whatever position you're in, it's not a static one. Like our lives are kind of like the average of a dynamic experience, right? So there are, even in functional recovery, or being in a place where I don't hit the criteria for BPD anymore, like there are still moments that are really hard, and I in that moment don't feel like my life is worth living. And I think in those moments, it's like, but I am still alive, which means a life worth living is possible. It's like, it's only not possible if I'm dead, because there's nothing that it can be changed about that. But I think, so I think in the moments where it doesn't feel, it's like, it can be like there's still potential for change and hope for the future. So that's sort of what I would say about that. Okay, can the discussion open to interpersonal relationships and the idea that not identifying emotions and managing responses or unmet needs can lead to not getting the most out of relationships of any kind? Sure, we can open that up. So it sounds like somebody has like ideas about this. So identifying emotions in relationships. I guess we can talk about that. What are your thoughts?
Me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the question is entirely.
Yeah,
so
it's just maybe what are the thoughts about it?
Yeah, so ask a question about that, and we can definitely talk about
it. So there's let's see, questions. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, context I have. Oh wait, I don't know if there's any more. If there's any more about. I'm trying to figure out if there's any more about that particular relationships piece. Oh, let's see. Well, whoever asked the question about the other thing, let us know. We have let's see. There's a lot of comments, but not a lot of questions. Let's see. I feel like such a burden to people who care about me because I see that they are trying to be there for me, but I feel like I keep asking for more and more and more, and it makes me feel horrible to even ask for help. Well, while we're waiting for whoever had that other thing about relationships to expand on that, I guess what I will say as a thought about this is, I think this is where I feel like checking the facts is a really important thing, because like I feel, to me, feeling like a burden and actually being considered by others to be a burden are two different things. And I know that there are people who in my life who definitely did feel burned out by my requests for help, because they were not really in a position, they weren't the person for the job. And then I've had other people in my life who wished that I would rely on them more, because that was something that felt meaningful and worthwhile to them. So at least that's my thought, is that it's probably important to differentiate between the emotional sense of being a burden and what other people actually think, because I don't know, it's hard, but I find it's important for the people I care about, at least, to take them at their word. So like if somebody says that they're happy to help and they want me to rely on them, unless they tell me explicitly otherwise, like I'm going to choose to believe what they tell me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing is it's a both and, like you're saying, Zanny, like everybody in your life is going to have different capabilities. I think what makes it hard is we often will like interpret certain behaviors or whatever as like people experiencing us as a burden. And it's not even always that people experience us as a burden, but like Zanny said, they might not always have the capacity to show up and be there for us. And so like one thing that my therapist said to me in early recovery that really stuck with me is, one time I was like reaching out to her for support, and she was like, Lane, I really want to help you through this. And like, I can't be your distress tolerance. I can't like survive this moment for you. So, I want to help you figure out how to do this. And like, at some point, you're going to have to do it yourself. And I think like that really stuck with me, because it helped me realize that like she was saying that because she wants me to be able to handle my own emotions and learn how to do that, and that her not showing up for me wasn't because she didn't care or that I was a burden. It's because like, at some point we also have to be able to do these things to some degree on our own. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a both and, right? Like you're probably not as much of a burden as you might experience yourself to be. And if other people aren't showing up in the way that you need them to, it's not always because they don't care or they do experience you as a burden. It's just that other people have their own limits, or, maybe they don't know how to help. And so like being able to figure that out on your own will help you so much.
Yeah, and I think also, being able to do things for yourself is an important skill to, like you were talking about, Lena, with your example. It's like other people can't feel your feelings for you. So like I think sometimes it's been valuable for me to take a step back and think, am I going to someone for something that would, I don't want to say that I should be able to do for myself, but that would make me feel more competent and like more masterful of my own life if I was doing it for myself. Because sometimes I've definitely over relied on people at times, and then it gives me this sense of fear of like, well, what if so and so can't answer the phone today? Like what do I do in that moment? And being able to have some skills to get myself through those moments has been really valuable, because then I just feel better about myself knowing that I don't, we're humans are social animals, so we still need each other, but not feeling like I have to have somebody for every single difficult moment. Gives me a sense of more freedom. Okay, so the expansion on the relationship thing. I had to decide whether to cut ties with my sister. I did. I was going to lead with detached, righteous anger, and a therapist helped me realize that will lead to further problems of isolation, anxiety, depression, i.e., the exact opposite of what I needed. I did try a different approach in the end. So maybe to clarify the question, gaining an understanding and processing of my emotions to any given situation makes me doubt that I'm not sabotaging relationships. So what's the question is it how do I not doubt this, or how do I have confidence? Is that what you're asking?
I feel like maybe what I'm understanding is I think what can happen, I know like this happened for me where I would just burn bridges with people. I would end a friendship in like a conversation. If someone said like the wrong thing to me, I'd be like, fuck you, you're dead to me. And so after that, because I felt like I really lost my trust in myself to be able to sort of distinguish how to just kind of have relationships. And so I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but I think what can happen for a lot of us is we kind of lose our ability to detect like what's a relationship that's worth saving or not. And if I'm, taking a step back from a relationship or, like whatever, that means I'm sabotaging it. Yeah, like how do I trust myself? Yeah, this is where, and I'm a DBT therapist and I went through DBT, so all my stuff's gonna link back to DBT, but I think really having that sense of wise mind of like my own like sense of like inner intuition or whatever, helped me understand that like this isn't just an emotional thing. There's a whole list. There's a backlog of this situation. This is why I'm letting this person go. And when I'm able to link that to my emotions and my values in a relationship, to know that I don't value behaving this way in a relationship. So if someone does it to me, the same rule applies. That helps me have a better sense of like how to trust myself, because I'm linking it to a lot of different pieces, not just maybe how I feel or what my, you know, inner critic is saying, like, oh, you know, how can you trust yourself? You're just sabotaging again. If I'm able to link it to my values, my feelings, like the facts of the situation, then it's hard to argue with it.
Yeah, we actually have an episode, I think it's the first episode of the second half of our third season that's coming out, I think, on January 3rd. That's all about how to trust yourself. So I highly recommend checking that out when it comes out. But I think it's weird. It is, trusting myself is one of those things that I realize is kind of a balancing act, in the sense that I think being able to realize that I can't always trust myself, in the sense that I don't always have enough information to, or, you know, maybe I'm in a state of being extremely emotional, where I'm more in my emotion mind and I'm not able to access my wise mind as easily. Like, I think for me, being able to recognize those moments and allow myself the time to think about things, then when I like, I often have this sense that I have to make a decision or deal with something right away, because especially when I'm overcome with intense emotions, it feels urgent. It feels like it has to be solved right now, or my life is over, this relationship is over, whatever is over, and you know, I don't think I can tolerate that. But more often than not, a situation can allow me to take a step back. Sometimes, like, take a day, take a week, you know, especially for really big important decisions, knowing that my emotions sometimes make it harder for me to think through things, and giving myself the time and space to really come at it from different angles, sometimes getting a trusted friend's opinion too. Then when I go back and like, this is my decision, I can feel pretty confident and strong in whatever it is, and that I can trust that decision that I've made, because I know that I took the time to really explore what I wanted to do, and it wasn't just me reacting in the moment.
Totally.
Oh, can you talk about any experience of success with schema therapy? I'm exploring it, but it will take a lot of complexity navigating the UK healthcare system, as it is still seen as niche. So I don't know, Lynn, if you've done schema therapy. I haven't done it personally, but one of our cast members, Raf, has done schema therapy, and they talked about it in our second season. We did a video about some of the most well-known treatment options for BPD, including sort of like the self-discovery path of like non-therapy self-help kind of things. But schema therapy is interesting because as Rob puts it, it helps you to kind of identify some of the categories of things that can be an issue for you. So I'm trying to remember what some of the things were that were on their list. It's not coming to me. Lana, do you have any thoughts?
I'm honestly not very familiar with schema therapy, and I've heard tell that finding treatment for BPD in the UK can be kind of challenging. So my sympathies for that. You know, it sounds like I mean, it's known as like one of the treatments for BPD that can be really effective. There is some good research on it. So, you know, that's about all I can offer. I apologize.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I can't remember what rough specific schemas were, but they said that what's helpful about it is, I guess I should look up what is the definition of a schema. That will help. I don't have it off the top of my head. But essentially it's a representation of no, that's not correct. There you go. There's so many words that are used in a lot of different places. A cognitive structure representing a person's knowledge about some entity or situation, including its qualities and the relationship between, oh no, I lost it, between these. So schemas are usually abstractions that simplify a person's world. So like being able to identify some of the maladaptive schemas that you have can help you to interpret certain, like the situations in your lives through the lens of like, oh, this is activating my abandonment schema, or this other thing. And that, as I understand it, again, sorry, this is not like the best answer, but that's what Ralph said, that helps them, because when they know what some of their maladaptive schemas are, it's kind of like they have a map in life for where minds are, like in a minefield. It's kind of like having a map. So you're not always just blindsided. You sort of understand why certain things are activated in specific contexts, or why something might bring up a particular emotion that reminds you of your childhood or whatever. So yeah. All right. My fear of abandonment makes me split really badly, and that leads to conflicts with the people who care for me. My black and white thinking jeopardizes everything good. How do I deal with this? Splitting. Ooh. All or nothing thinking. That is
I think that's yeah.
Go for it.
Sorry. I think that's one of the things that can still show up for me, but at least I'm able to recognize it. So like, you know, if like for example, I shared earlier that I had this total just like emotional meltdown on Friday because my cat attacked a bird. And when I called my partner, like he was kind of confused what was happening. And so it wasn't as supportive in like the way I needed him to be. And so my immediate I definitely had a splitting episode. It wasn't as bad as it's been in the past. Now that I'm in recovery, it looks more just like, oh, I like won't talk on the phone, or I'll say like, you know, oh, you're not being supportive or whatever. And you know, it's not, I don't split to the point of like being like, oh, you're a horrible person, or I'm not meant to be with you sort of thing anymore. But I think what the hard thing to do and the helpful thing to do is that when I get into a place where I'm so emotional, that's usually when I start to split, is when I feel like my emotions are out of control. So I generally try not to make big decisions or evaluations about my life when I'm in an intensely emotional place. Like on Friday, I have my moments where it's, you know, I can lose sight of that to some degree, but I can still like grab it back, right? Before it gets out of control. So I think that for me is the big kicker, is being able to say, you know what, I'm really, really in intense emotions right now. I don't think that I can really make a judgment about this person in my life or this whatever, right? That's probably the biggest help for me.
Yeah, I think that stopping something, like take you the DBT stop skill of just stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed. That's a weird way to say that. And then proceeding mindfully. I think that is one of the most important things for me in splitting, because if I, you know, sometimes I convince myself that, you know, I'm being righteous, or I'm standing up for myself, or like, this is the right thing to do. This is me setting a boundary. And I feel like even when I may be in the right, if I sound especially aggressive, or I'm very high negative energy and I'm kind of directing that at somebody, I had this realization once where I was like, it doesn't actually matter in my value system. It doesn't matter to me most of the time if it's with someone I care about and I want to maintain a relationship with them. It doesn't actually matter if I am justified to be upset. Like, I don't want to be a person who tries to get their way by being aggressive at my loved ones. And so that realization made it easier for me to engage in the stop skill and get myself to take a step back, because it was kind of like, it doesn't matter if I'm right. It just does not matter if I'm justified to be angry. Like, I want to communicate in a way that other people are more likely to hear me. And so that's helped me not to engage in the righteous anger where I'm justified in just being a jerk right now, you know? I don't always succeed in that. And it's especially difficult when I'm in situations with people that are not my loved ones, like some rando on the street who's really nasty. It's much harder for me to hold it in, because in that moment I feel like I don't care about them that much. So there's not as much of a reason to hold it in, but over the years I've gotten better at that as well. It's harder, but yeah, I think that just putting space between the thoughts and the reaction really makes a big difference in not splitting with other people. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's also what can happen is if we're trying not to split, then we, for a lot of us, we'll just go to the other extreme and invalidate our own emotions, which tends to just make us want to split more. So I think for me, when I'm trying to say oh, I'm in an emotional place, maybe it's not a good time for me to have a serious conversation or whatever. I also want to take that time to still validate what I'm feeling. Maybe I'm not wanting to do something about it. Maybe I'm able to recognize oh, I'm just really intensely sad right now, but still make space for that. Because I think we're really, those of the BPD tend to be really good at just telling ourselves, stop feeling you're making a big deal out of something or whatever. That usually doesn't help. This makes it worse.
Yeah. The person about Richard said, I'm really grateful to you both for hosting this space. It came to me serendipitously, and you've given me a real boost and a smile. The power of relatability and trustworthy info. Oh, thank you. Awesome. Somebody said the tip skills can be good for, I'm assuming this is the taking a step back during black and white. Yeah, but sticking my face in a bowl of cold water is one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I love it so much. It really helps me calm down.
Totally.
Okay. Oh, we have another question. I tend to turn numb towards really horrible situations, but if a tiny thing happens, absolutely irrelevant things will make me explode. How do I deal with this? I'm assuming the question is how to find more of a balance there. This is one of those things I can relate to a lot, where big things will happen and I have a harder time connecting to my emotions, and then small stuff I'm the laundry was still wet or something. I forgot to push the start button, and I'm just furious because I'm why? How could you, to myself, how could you, Zanny, be so dumb? You didn't push the start button. What's your problem? And I think I got frustrated when I had a conversation when I was explaining to my therapist this phenomenon, and I was like, what is wrong with me? It's so easy for me to be upset about little things, and big things, it's so much harder sometimes. And she was like, well, it's because it's a big deal. If it doesn't really matter that much, then, at least in the moment, having intense emotions about laundry, it's of little consequence. Having, going through the grief, for example, of losing someone you really care about, that feels much more serious. That can feel much more, what am I saying? it's bigger. And it can feel, sometimes to admit how you feel about more serious things can be scary. I know for me, I have a hard time because I feel like admitting my emotions about some of those more intense things I believe this myth sometimes that it makes me less capable of handling the situation. And so I don't allow myself to feel emotions for some situations. Sometimes I try to hold it together because, oh no, if you let this out, it will never stop and you'll just be this giant mess on the floor and no one's going to want to deal with that, So, I don't know, for me, being able, practicing self-compassion and non-judgment and giving myself the space to feel those emotions around serious things helps me to process and move on. And then the littler things, because I feel like for me, one of the things that happens is I end up dumping my emotions about more serious things on non-serious things because it just feels like it's of little consequence. I can just dump it here and it's not a big deal. But then I'm not really attaching the significance to the thing I'm actually upset about. And then, of course, I get confused about my sense of reality and my connection to the world around me. So, yeah, those are my 2 cents about that. What about you?
I mean, yeah, I would say you hit the nail on the head. I would also say, again, this is where, yeah, like you said, that self-compassion comes in because if I'm even hearing some judgment, there's some self-judgment in the question of, I get upset about irrelevant things. And, I like to think of treating myself as I would like a little toddler, this is actually a DBT trick is to think if you were standing in front of a toddler who was upset about something, most likely, if they were somebody I cared about, especially, I probably wouldn't be like, what are you crying about? You're making a big deal out of nothing, right? So treating myself with that same self-compassion that in the moment, stubbing my toe is maybe not in the grand scheme of the universe, probably not the biggest problem anyone's ever experienced and probably something I can get over. And in the moment, we've all probably stubbed our toe, it's horrible, right? So the more we're able to, yeah, the more we're also able just to be oh God, that hurt, right? Practice that self-compassion just to say man, that hurt and it hurts and other people going through this would hurt also. The easier it is to move on from stuff because we're not also piling on the shame about having a reaction to something.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned using mindfulness when doing the dishes because I hate it. So breathing, focus, intention, sensation, naming. And that made me, for some reason, think of there's a lot of the questions and a lot of the situations that have been brought up have been, in the midst of intense interpersonal situations or using skills in moments that are really, really big. And I think one of the most helpful things for me was when my therapist said to me, you have to practice these things in low risk, low emotion situations if you're gonna use them in these intense situations. Because I would always wait until the moments when I felt like I needed to use skills to start trying to apply them. And the best analogy I can come up with is, that would be like trying to go play a professional sport, to practice it. I'm going to go play professional baseball. And that's how, you practice, before you're in a game to learn the skills, right? And so I think that's one of the things that's really made a big difference is doing mindfulness on the dishes. It's not a thing where I am going to be highly emotional about it. I'm not a huge fan of dishes either. So, I'm going to be okay. But that's a place where because for me, most the emotionally activating situations or with other people, I'm probably not gonna have like some deeply problematic reaction to doing the dishes. Yeah.
I'm fortunate maybe that I do the laundry, my partner does the dishes. So when I wash dishes, it's very rare. So I don't hate it as much. But yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. Let's see. Like a mental rehearsal for a potential trigger. Yeah. They're saying coping ahead. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's another, I mean, that's basically what this is, right? It's
Yeah.
making a plan. And so, you know, I guess that would just be my general advice to anyone who's watching this who is, you know, dealing with a lot of really intense situations. Try to identify sort of lower ticket items or moments in your life where you could practice some of these skills where it's not hard to practice because it's not intensely emotionally activating. And it's hard because it can feel silly sometimes to be like, oh, I'm not going through an intensely emotional situation, but I'm going to go practice the ice water skill and stick my face in a bowl of cold water. It's sort of like, why would I do that to myself, right? But our bodies remember, you know, a lot of the actions that we take and what fires together, wires together, like the things that you associate. And the more you practice, the more it becomes second nature. And then eventually you get to the point where even in intense situations, you can act on your skills automatically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So much. Thank you for helping me understand these things by answering all my questions. I really needed to hear it all today. I hope you both the best healing journey and a beautiful life. Truly, thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you,
here.
everyone, so much. Do you have any last parting thoughts?
No, I hope that folks got something out of this. Hope that it was useful.
Yeah.
It's been great talking to you all. I know these lives are always so funny. I don't ever do lives because I know it feels funny. It feels like I want to actually like talk to people, but I appreciate folks for typing and us talking conversation.
Yeah. It's everyone is a little bit different. There's like a totally different culture every time, so it's kind of
Nice.
It's fun. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for watching. This is the last of our scheduled holiday lives. We may throw in another impromptu one here or there. You'll see. We're going to be back with the second half of the third season of the BPD Bunch on January 3rd. So definitely come check that out, and we will see you then. Bye.
Thanks. So, bye.